We have an incredibly invasive fish living in the UK, but it might be one that you've never even heard of, the Prussian carp.
Also known as the Gibel carp, these were once thought to be a subspecies of goldfish, but have now been classified as their own species. They get up to 10 pounds, but normally around the 3 to 4 pound mark. Not a native to the UK, though interestingly they do feature in Reverend Houghton's British Freshwater Fishers book, so they may well have been in the UK for longer than we first thought. Currently they have a limited distribution to a few commercial fishing lakes. Because of the close resemblance to goldfish, and many people not knowing what they could be more widespread.
So basically they're a kind of giant goldfish, but you might think, what's the problem with that? We already have loads of goldfish in the UK. Well, they have a couple of very worrying and interesting traits that make them a huge threat to native fish.
One of the main concerns is that they breed with the closely related crucian, and over time quickly outcompete them. This crossbreeding means that the genetics are all mixed up and you start to lose the species. Prussian carp take this one step further, however, and will clone themselves with any other cyprinid, so a female Prussian can have her eggs fertilised by other carp species, and the offspring will all be cloned to the mother, and soon enough you'll end up with a pond full of Prussians. This has happened across mainland Europe, to the point now where true crucians are a rare find. They are tricky to be 100% when IDing them, but look at the large scales, dipped dorsal fin, and a lateral line count of 29 to 33.
Chances are you're not going to encounter one, but it's good to be vigilant and know the signs just in case you do. If you enjoyed this vid, please leave a comment down below. Let me know what species you'd like me to cover in the next Fishmas video, and if you can subscribe to the channel, it really helps me out. I'll see you in the next vid. Cheers.
Hey Laura.
Yes, Ellie?
Do you ever wish we knew more about the lives of British fish?
Every single day.
Wait, what's that over there?
It's Jack Picks promoting his latest book, The Field Guide to British Fish.
My God, you're right!
So this is one I hear all the time as a fish keeper, and that is, if you put a plastic heron next to your garden pond, it'll deter real herons from eating your fish. But is there any truth to this?
In short, no. I can only think that garden centres might have started this myth to sell plastic herons, but there's a number of reasons why this is a bad idea. Firstly, grey herons are the most common species we get in the UK, and are communal nesting birds, meaning they live in groups, so they aren't put off by another bird's presence. In fact, they look for other birds, as that's a sign that there's food, so rather than putting herons off, you might be advertising your pond as a convenient snack station for local herons. Herons aren't stupid either, and if the plastic heron is in the same spot all the time, they quickly twig on that it's not real. The other issue is that you might be conditioning your fish to not associate the outline of a heron with danger, as they can get used to the fake one being there, and they're not scared when the real one comes along to eat them.
So a plastic heron is definitely not a good idea to keep real herons from eating your fish. But how can you stop the little sods from getting at your goldfish?
Grey herons are protected under the Wildlife and Countryside Act, which means it's illegal to harm, kill and catch them. I've never been a fan of nets over ponds, but it is an effective way of stopping most herons from getting to your fish. If you are in the pond building stage, make sure you have deep margins to stop the birds wading in. You could try a plastic owl or bird of prey, but again, if it doesn't move, they quickly learn it's not a threat. If you live near a river or a large lake, herons are probably going to be something you just have to live with.
So plastic herons are completely useless at keeping the real things out, but a decent pond net is definitely worthwhile investing in. I've seen a few times that people can confidently state that they can tell the difference between a stocked brown trout and a wild brown trout. So how do you do it? Is it that easy to tell them apart?
In practice, there's no difference. They're the same species and a large wild fish can look very similar to what's known as a well-mended stockfish, basically a stock trout that's been in the wild for a few years. It's really a case of what boxes can we tick. So often size is key. Stock trout are often bigger than wild fish. If you take a small stream for example, a large wild fish would be maybe 3 pounds, while stocked brown trout can be double this. On the opposite end of the scale, most fisheries wouldn't stock anything under 2 pounds, so if you catch a very small brown trout, it's almost certainly a wild fish. Behaviour is a clue also, with stockfish often being more social, hanging around in shoals, while wild brown trout tend to be more solitary.
So is it completely cut and dry that you can tell the difference between a wild fish and a stocked fish? Well, not exactly.
Location is also key. If the area you're fishing is very remote, no angling club, and has a history of big fish, then there's a good chance it's wild. If it's a commercial trout pond or stock stretch of river, however, it's most likely a stocked fish. Fish do move, of course, so just because the stretch of river you're fishing doesn't stock fish, doesn't mean that stock fish from elsewhere might not move in. If it's a recently stocked fish, it may well have more ragged and beat up fins, a symptom of being in a densely stocked tank or pond, while wild fish, the fins are normally pristine. The colours are often more vivid on wild fish, but with the brown trout, colour varies massively anyway. Some fisheries will clip fins or even tattoo a blue spot on the fish to help ID stocked fish, but not all of them do this.
So it's difficult to be 100% on when you've got a stocked fish that's been in the river for a while and a wild fish, but we can certainly make educated guesses. 12,000 years ago, Britain was connected to Europe via a land bridge. The Thames was also connected to the Rhine in a large wetland system. So it begs the question, why does Europe have so many more fish species compared to England?
There are 71 species of freshwater fish found in the Rhine. Many are the same as what we have in England, like roach, perch and pike. But they also have species like nace, asp and spurling. Many species of fish are only native to the east of England because of the former land bridge, like silver bream, barbel, ruff and crucians for example. The species that aren't here are all hardy and they share similar habitats and ranges with all the species that we currently have.
It's really strange that we don't have some species because some of them, like nace and asp for example, are really widespread across Europe and yet non-existent here in England. So does that mean that we've never had them?
The trouble with historical records of fish is often very similar looking fish would just be lumped together, and from an eating point of view, it didn't really matter if it was a dace, roach or rudd, they're all little silver fish. So could these lost species just blended in with other species? There are records of fish that seem quite weird. Some of them are referenced in the book British Freshwater Fishes by the Reverend W. Houghton, which has a few oddly looking fish like the graining, azarine and jubal. Could some of these be lost European fish? I'm going to cover this in another video, but in short, it's more likely they were just misidentified dace and roach. The truth of it is that over time, if these other species were present in English rivers, they simply died out, maybe due to lack of genetic diversity, habitat, or perhaps even overfishing. But there is currently no data to suggest that any of these fish were in large numbers in English rivers historically.
So can I say that Britain never had any of these fish in eastern flowing rivers? It's almost impossible to say. I'd say it's actually likely to many degrees. I can say definitely we don't have them now, however, but maybe we did in the past. I get chatting to river keepers a lot, and one of the topics that comes up a lot is that signal crayfish are having a detrimental effect by eating lots of fish eggs. But do they actually do this? Is there any evidence of this?
Signal crayfish are not native to Britain, being introduced from America for the food market. They escaped and are now found in most of the rivers in England. They aren't fussy in diet, eating pretty much whatever they can grab with their claws. But do fish eggs make up a large part of their diet? Well, if we take salmon for example, these fish spawn in the depths of winter in fast-flowing water, laying the eggs in highly oxygenated areas. Crayfish slow down massively in the winter, not moving as much, and even at the best of times don't like tackling fast flows, so the likelihood of signal crayfish pushing against fast, cold water is low. What about cyprinids which spawn in the summer, often in lower flows? They're more likely to be predated, but often on weeds which are more difficult for the crayfish to reach.
So does that mean that signal crayfish don't impact fish spawning? Well, not exactly, not at least in the way you might expect.
One of the major issues signal crayfish cause is digging into riverbanks, which causes them to collapse and lots of mud to enter the river. This chokes the gravels with mud, which makes it harder for chub, barbel and salmon to successfully spawn. So in an indirect way, they are causing less fish in the river, but not by eating them, but by suffocating the spawning grounds.
So in short, signal crayfish are detrimental to fish stocks, and rather depressingly, there's not a great deal you can do to get rid of signal crayfish once they get into a new water body, so it's incredibly important not to spread them around and to check our gear before we go to new waterways. If you've ever watched a nature documentary, you'll likely know the life cycle of the salmon, in which after they spawn, they all die. Or do they? Well, nature sometimes has other plans.
If we look at Pacific salmon, those 6 species of salmon all die after spawning, and this is an important part of the life cycle, as the nutrients from all these dead fish feed the many invertebrates in the river, which in turn feed the young salmon, so it's all part of nature's grand plan.
While Pacific salmon all die, what about their Atlantic cousins? Do they all die after spawning?
Atlantic salmon are a different kettle of fish. Pretty much all the males will die after spawning, as they use so much energy trying to mate with as many females as possible, and guarding reds, it ultimately takes its toll. But females are different. Once she's spawned, she'll return to sea to feed up, and if she can make the gauntlet safely back out, she will return several times, as is often the case with larger fish. According to Nature Scotland, it's about 90 to 95% of all Atlantic salmon that die after spawning, so the odds are stacked against them.
So some large salmon will be multiple spawners, breeding every year or so. It's incredible, really. One of the most common fish-related stories I hear is that ducks move fish eggs via them sticking to their feet. But is there any truth to that? Let's find out.
Well, let's look at this logically. Fish eggs are very sensitive to light, temperature and moisture. So if the eggs were attached to a duck's foot and the duck then took flight, they would be bombarded with all kinds of issues, the main one being the eggs drying out, which would almost certainly kill them off. So while in theory this could happen, it would only work with very short distances, and chances are, if lakes are close enough together, either flooding or people would ensure that they had fish in them already.
So fish eggs sticking to a duck's feet and surviving to a remote pond is pretty unlikely. So case closed, right? Well, not quite.
The Centre for Ecological Research in Hungary proceeded to do an experiment in a lab. They fed thousands of eggs from 2 invasive carp species to 8 mallard ducks. About 0.2% of these ingested eggs, that's 18 of 8,000, were intact after defecation, the team found. Some of those eggs contained wiggling embryos and a few eggs hatched. This means fish eggs can potentially be spread by ducks. Ducks are known to be opportunistic feeders, and they may consume fish eggs along with other food items in their environment. This is likely fish eggs attached to plant matter rather than ducks actively searching out the eggs. After consuming fish eggs, ducks can inadvertently transport the eggs to other water bodies when they move from one location to another. This can happen if the ducks carry the fish eggs in their digestive systems and then excrete them in a different water source. It's worth noting that while this is a possibility, the extent to which ducks contribute to the spread of fish eggs may vary depending on the specific species of ducks, the type of fish eggs, and the ecological context. Additionally, other factors such as water currents, wind, and human activities can also play a role in the dispersal of fish eggs in aquatic environments.
Fish eggs surviving inside of a duck is pretty wild, and it shows how resilient nature can be. I've thought about this a few times, and there are a few contenders for this title, but which is the rarest fish in England?
Many people will point towards the Arctic char, but they are found in half a dozen lakes in the Lake District, so they've got a good spread at least. Then there's the skelly, which is a kind of whitefish found in 4 lakes, again in a Lake District. Burbot could be mentioned here, but I'd stress they're more likely extinct than rare, so we can safely discount them. Alice shad are restricted to one confirmed healthy breeding population in the southwest of England, though this population is monitored, and while numbers aren't high, they seem stable for the time being.
I think they're all worthy contenders, but there's only one fish that can take the title, the Vendace. It's incredibly rare, only being found in Derwent water and Bassenwaite water in the Lake District, and recently it's thought to be extinct in the latter.
Like the shelly that was previously mentioned, it's a whitefish, a glacial relic. The problem is, we just don't know a lot about them. There's no recent studies being done on them, so we have no idea on population size, and there's a very real threat that we could lose this fish in the next few years if we don't do anything. Thanks to water pollution, rising temperatures, and the introduction of non-native fish, the Vendace is in trouble.
Have you ever seen a Vendace? If you have, comment down below. I'd love to hear about it. This is a common one among new aquarists, when they buy fish that get too big for a small tank. So is it true? Do fish only grow to the size of their tank?
While it may seem that some fish do grow to the size of the tank, it's more likely that due to unfavourable conditions, the animal unfortunately doesn't get the opportunity to fulfil its full potential. Put simply, fish that cannot grow to their full size are stunted or deformed. This is why it's vital to get fish that won't outgrow your tank, so always look up the max size of any fish before you buy one. Factors like diet will affect fish growth, water quality, chemistry, pheromones, and even genetics.
So while it may seem that the fish is growing to the size of the tank, in actuality they're just stunted and deformed, and if they were in a larger tank or an outdoor pond, they'd be much happier and grow to a bigger size.
Some species will get blunted noses. Sturgeon often get this in small ponds, and it's good to note some fish live quite long. Goldfish, for example, up to 20 years, so you want to make sure that you've got a big enough environment for that fish to live in. The best practice is to have a big enough tank, of course, or if it's a cold water fish, you could move it into your garden pond if there's more room there, like with koi or goldfish.
So in short, if you get big fish, get yourself a big tank. It's nice and simple. Do fish feed more in the rain? It's one that as an angler I've heard so many people repeat, but is there any truth to it? Does a bit of drizzle ring the dinner bell for fish? Let's find out.
Anecdotally at least, many anglers swear that rain will put the fish on the feed. But why would that be? Many fish are known to be more active in overcast or rainy weather, mainly due to the reduced light levels and surface disturbances that provide a sense of security. As a result, fish tend to venture into open spaces and feed more freely during rainy weather, increasing the opportunities for anglers to catch them. It should be noted also that in lakes, rain is often accompanied by low pressure, with sudden changes often affecting oxygen levels, which can do the opposite and put fish off the feed and even in some cases cause mass fish kills.
So in lakes and ponds, rain is a bit of a mixed blessing. But what about in moving water, in rivers and streams? Does rain bring the fish on the feed there?
For rivers, it's a slightly different story, as many anglers who fish will know low levels mean the rivers warm up and loses oxygen, so a good downpour can help cool the river down. It's also important for helping migratory fish move upstream, so if you're trying to catch salmon or sea trout, lots of rain a day or two before is good to get the fish moving. For coarse anglers, the rain can provide murky water, which helps hide the bait and the fish seeing the hook, so again, makes the fish a little bit more confident in feeding.
Depending where you're fishing, the rain could well bring the fish onto the feed, but you're unlikely to empty the lake. Eels are incredible fish, and they're shrouded in mystery. In fact, we've already covered them once in this series, if you want to watch that video above my head. But in the meantime, one of the most common myths about them is, can they move over land at night, say from a river to get to a new pond? Do they actually do that?
European eels have a slender and slimy serpentine body, so as far as fish go, they could at least practically move over land. Certainly elvers, the young of eels, will move over damp rocks and walls to get upstream, and during their spring migration, it's not uncommon to see them leave the water and move in the margins. They do this to avoid fast flows, but why would an eel move from a river to a lake or a pond? The simple answer is when they're in the freshwater phase, they want to find new feeding grounds to grow as big as possible before heading out to sea again, and an isolated pond is likely to have less competition.
So we know that eels can survive out of water as long as the ground is damp for prolonged periods, but is there any evidence of them making it from one water body to another?
Eels do certainly turn up in some weird and strange places. Normally though, there is some kind of watery route, whether it's a nearby river, stream, or even a damp ditch. As long as there's some kind of pathway, they'll use it. The idea that an adult eel would willingly leave the water and become completely exposed to predation seems a bit far-fetched to me. The most likely cause for eels in lakes and ponds are flooding, birds eating them and regurgitating them, or in some cases, a helping hand from people.
European eels are incredible creatures and adaptable to many challenges. One thing I often see anglers talk about is wetting your hands before you touch fish. But why do they do that, and why is it so important to do it? Let's find out.
The mucus layer on a fish's body acts as a barrier against bacteria and other harmful substances. When you touch a fish with dry hands, it can strip away this protective slime, potentially causing stress and infection to the fish. Your hand could also have all kinds of chemicals on it, from soaps, aftershave, hand sanitizer for example. These can all damage a fish's skin. Wetting your hands is considered a best practice for responsible fishing, especially when doing catch and release. If using a barbless hook, you may even be able to just unhook the fish in the water without handling it.
So if it's possible, it is always best to wet your hands before you handle any fish. If you're fishing for the pot, then obviously it doesn't really matter. You're going to be smashing the fish on the head in a second anyway. But if you're doing catch and release, you should certainly wet your hands if you can before you put the fish back.
For small fish, a viewing tank is a great idea to get a better view of it without keeping it out of the water and handling it too much. If you're fishing somewhere that's not near the water, like a pier or high banks, a sponge on a rope can be a good way to wet your hands. Ultimately, most fish aren't going to die from a quick handle of dry hands, but if you can wet them, it's best to. Some fish are very slimy, like eels, tench and bream, and I appreciate that handling them with wet hands isn't going to help the situation.
So yeah, definitely try and wet your hands if you can. That protects that protective slime that keeps the fish healthy.
Well, I don't know whether that's a roach or a rudd. Take a picture and put it on Facebook. Well, according to Facebook, it's a roach, it's a roach, it's a roach, it's a rudd, it's a roach. Somebody says it's a bream, and it's a rudd. Well, that doesn't help. If only there was something that would tell me exactly what it is. Ah. Thanks, Jack. Let's have a look. Turns out it's a rudd.
It's all right, mate. No need to thank me. That's 20 quid.
£20. Bargain.
A couple of people in the comments have mentioned this about pike. Can they attack dogs and even people? Well, let's look into this.
With up to 700 backward-facing teeth, you certainly wouldn't want to bite from a pike. There are varying figures online of how big prey pike can take, with some figures suggesting up to 25% of its body weight, and I've caught pike with fish so large the tail is still hanging out of its mouth. Prey items as big as mallards and coots have also been recorded. So if we take a small dog, say like this dachshund, which is 8 pounds, that would mean a pike of 32 pounds plus could likely scoff it. I was tempted to chuck the small dog in a lake to see if a pike would have it, but my wife wouldn't let me.
So in practice at least, a huge pike could eat a very small dog. But are there any actual cases of pike attacking dogs or people?
There is an article online about a husky crossbreed getting attacked by a pike, but this is obviously too big a dog for one to eat, so likely mistook the dog for something manageable. Human attacks are pretty rare, and more often than not, pike will swim away. The only times pike have had a go is sometimes swimmers' hands. When wearing a wetsuit and no gloves, the hands look like a small, flashy fish. With a couple of recorded cases. But more often, it's when anglers unhook the fish, and I'm not sure you class that as an attack.
I want to stress the point that pike are incredibly shy, and the chances of one attacking your pet or you are incredibly slim, so I wouldn't be worried about letting your dog have a little swim. Sturgeon are huge fish that can be found across the northern hemisphere, and here in the UK we used to have 2 native species, but could they return to the UK on their own?
The critically endangered European sturgeon and the near-threatened Atlantic sturgeon were both found in British waters. They were found in many of the bigger rivers across Britain, and the last one to be caught by an angler was in 1993 in the River Towy in Wales. Both species can get to huge sizes, with the European sturgeon getting to 6 metres and over 400 pounds in weight, making it by far the biggest freshwater fish in the UK.
Many anglers in the UK catch sturgeon in rivers like the Trent, but the fact is these are not the native species. These are normally a mix of Siberians, sterlets and diamonds. Essentially, you're just catching someone's discarded pet.
If you aren't sure, it's still best to take some good photos and send it to the UK Sturgeon Alliance, who will happily ID it for you. Although river specimens have been few and far between, we are finding native sturgeon around our coastline, with anglers catching them and coming up in trawler nets, meaning at the very least these sturgeon have the capacity to make their own way back. Sturgeon are long-lived, some getting over 100 years old, and they take a long time to become sexually mature, females normally around 16 years.
So huge sturgeon could well return on their own, and there are plans to reintroduce them. When 2 different species breed, we call this hybridization, and this often leads to the offspring being sterile. But what about in fish?
Hybridization occurs when 2 closely related species spawn together. It's mostly seen in freshwater fish, as marine fish tend to have more room to avoid hybridizing. The most common cause is poor spawning habitat availability, forcing fish to breed in small areas, and inevitably some will mix. Although many mammalian hybrids are sterile, this isn't the case for cyprinids, and many can indeed breed, adding confusion to some of the fish ID when you have a roach with a quarter bream in it. In some cases, DNA tests are the only way to be 100% sure, as is the case with crucian hybrids, as they will mix with goldfish and guyball carp, which can be very difficult to tell apart. I should also note that hybridization is not an exact science, and not all hybrids will look the same, with lots of factors coming into play. For example, a male roach crossed with a female bream will look slightly different to a female bream crossed with a male roach.
So in theory, you could have a roach-bream hybrid, crossbreed with a roach, and the offspring would be 1/4 bream. This means that a venue that has species that can hybridize, you could never be fully sure if they are totally that species without genetic testing.
It's easy to assume it's a 50-50 split of features also, but nature doesn't work like that. So some truly weird and wonderful fish can be thrown up. I think most people who've spent enough time looking at fish like myself start to know when something isn't right with a fish's body proportions, colour and general appearance. In birdwatching it's called the jizz. I'm not sure what the fish equivalent is, but you get to the point where you know you can sniff out a hybrid.
To be honest, as long as the fish shows all the obvious signs of it being that species, then that's good with me. Does it really matter if a roach has 5% rudd in it? Rainbow trout are an American species brought over for fishing and aquaculture here in the UK. For the most part, that means that they can't spawn in most of our rivers and lakes, the notable exception being the Derbyshire Wye. But are there any other rivers that rainbow trout have successfully spawned in?
Firstly, let's look into why there are so few breeding populations. In the UK, all the rainbow trout that are farmed are either for the table or for stocking, and they're infertile, triploids, or they're all female, so in theory they shouldn't spawn, even if they get into a river. Typically, rainbow trout are also stocked either into large reservoirs or small trout lakes, which neither have suitable conditions for them to be able to spawn in, even if they could.
So we know what the rainbows need to spawn, but being so widespread, why haven't they colonised more rivers?
In the 1890s, eyed ova were imported by boat from the Bar-Jar coastal range in California. These eggs hatched out into Ashford Lake just north of Bakewell, where they were grown on and became adults. After 5 years, a massive flood occurred which broke the lake dam, allowing these rainbow trout to escape into the Derbyshire River Wye. By chance, the river has many of the same characteristics as the original river from which they came in California, allowing them to thrive and become successful spawners. It's for a combination of clean, cool water with lots of food, and its limestone properties support many rainbow trout. There are records of other rivers supporting wild rainbows like the Chess, Chew, Ryburn and Dower, but none of these have consistent numbers that the Wye does. So while it's possible other rivers have some, the Wye is the only river in Britain that you can reliably see and target wild rainbow trout.
So it seems that the Derbyshire Wye is the most successful and prolific river for spawning rainbows. There are few recorded deaths of people by freshwater fish in the UK. We don't have killer trout or murderous pike, but what we do have is an ancient blood-sucking parasite that killed a King of England.
King Henry I of England died in 1135, and according to some chroniclers of the time, it's believed that he succumbed to an illness caused by consuming a large quantity of lampreys. Back then, lamprey were a delicacy and often eaten at royal banquets. This also seems to be the only time you ever see the word surfeit used, and it's often the quote that he died eating a surfeit of lamprey, meaning a lot.
So yes, it didn't kill the king in the traditional sense, but it's likely that eating lots of lamprey did contribute to his death. But how exactly would that kill you?
It could of course just have been some undercooked fish, or it's been suggested blood poisoning. So why would a lamprey be dangerous to eat a lot of? Well, the mucus on a lamprey can make you experience poisoning symptoms several hours after ingestion, including nausea, vomiting, diarrhea, abdominal pain and weakness. So if not properly prepared, it would certainly make you feel unwell. It's important to note that historical records from this period can be scarce and may not always be entirely accurate. The exact cause of King Henry I's death remains a matter of historical debate, and while the lamprey theory is interesting, it's difficult to confirm with certainty.
So the moral of the story is, don't eat a load of lamprey all at once and you should be fine. For years, crucians were known as the native carp of England, but a recent study has put a shadow of doubt on this. So are crucians actually native?
crucians are often hailed as Britain's only native carp, but a report from Ecology and Evolution in 2022 has put a heavy shadow on this. It states, there is strong support for the theory that the crucian was brought over from Europe in the 15th century, and that native claims are based only on anecdotal evidence. It should be noted there's also the discovery of a crucian bone during an excavation at a Roman site, which gave rise to the idea that the crucian has been here even longer. This could well be a fish they brought with them for food or found locally. It's also been suggested that crucians could have been native, but have since interbred with continental crucians, mixing up the gene pool.
The question is, if crucians aren't native, what are the wider implications of that?
Well, it would mean it would be a lot harder to stock them into natural venues, which the EA have been doing for years, and possibly would have to stop. The fact is, crucians are in trouble across their whole range, mostly because of ponds being filled in and unsuitable for them, but also interbreeding with goldfish, carp, and recent arrival to the UK, the Gibel carp. So our isolated population, even though it may be introduced, is still important.
Even if crucians end up being non-native, they should still receive some care and attention, as the UK holds an important arc population. Bullheads or miller's thumbs are a small fish many of us caught as kids with a tiddler net, and they very rarely get caught on rod and line, but people are reporting seeing less of them. So is there any truth to it? Are there less bullheads now?
A staple of small stream netting, you'd often find sticklebacks, minnows, bullheads, and a stone roach if you were lucky, but have they declined? While talking to lots of anglers, it seems so. I even ran a survey in Anglers Mail to get people's opinions, and overwhelmingly people said there were less bullheads. They are a small bottom-dwelling fish that generally come out at night or hide under rocks, so are secretive on the best of days. One proposed theory is water quality affecting them, and it's true they do like running water which is well oxygenated, but at the same time I've found bullheads in some pretty dirty streams, and they can live quite happily in lakes, though most people would never think to stock them.
So while a lot of that is anecdotal evidence, is there any actual evidence that there are less bullheads?
The Environment Agency monitor fish numbers across the country via electrofishing and record what they catch. I got in touch and they reported no significant change in numbers of bullheads. So why does it appear that there's less? Well, it comes down to a couple of things in my opinion. Firstly, less people are on the rivers, and the ones that are typically target larger species like barbel or chub, so are unlikely to pick up a bullhead. As mentioned, they're more active at night, and the only time I've caught them on rod and line is during flood conditions when the water is murky and the rocks have moved around, exposing the bullheads. If you visit your local river and have a look under some rocks, I'd wager you'd find a bullhead.
It's not just bullheads. Many people report seeing less mini species like ruff, gudgeon, sticklebacks and etc. But like the bullhead, it's likely that people just don't target them anymore. We only have one native species of salmon in Britain, but in recent years a non-native species of salmon has turned up and it is growing in numbers.
Pink salmon were originally introduced to some Russian rivers in the 1960s, and they slowly spread westwards to colonise some northern Norwegian rivers. These fish spawn at a different time from Atlantic salmon, and they have a 2-year life cycle. Over the past 60 years, they have sporadically turned up in Western European rivers, but in the late 2010s, they showed up en masse in various Scottish rivers and were filmed successfully spawning, which caused quite a bit of concern from local fish biologists. Pink salmon originate from the northern Pacific Ocean, and because of their large numbers, can be used for aquaculture, although they aren't the most highly regarded eating fish out of the other West Coast salmon, with another name for them being called humpies, due to the large hump males get. In pink salmon, note the shape of the tail, spots on the tail, and the dark mouth. Atlantic salmon don't have these. breeding males are immediately identifiable because of their humps, and that almost certainly will be running milt at that time of year. Their black tongues and heavily spotted tails are also very obvious. Females will show heavily spotted tails and be a pinkish brown on the flanks.
So we have this non-native species of salmon, but are they a threat to the native salmon population?
Pink salmon spawn at a different time of year to Atlantic salmon, the end of July through to mid-October, usually on the main river channel in the lower reaches of rivers. Atlantics, on the other hand, spawn in winter, around November to January, depending on the population. This is normally in the upper reaches, so they aren't directly competing for spawning grounds and they can't hybridise. Atlantic salmon are also much bigger, so the smaller pink salmon aren't really a threat to them with regards to predation or attacking them. Juvenile pink salmon hatch within 3 to 4 months and then quickly migrate to sea, limiting their potential interaction with the native salmonid species, so the offspring don't have much contact either. So on paper, it sounds like there's not much of an issue, but there are a couple of factors. Pink salmon are carriers of red skin disease, which can devastate Atlantic salmon populations, and if the pink salmon grow in numbers, that's more fish carrying it. While they may not be a threat in the river, at sea there's a major problem, which is that they compete with Atlantic salmon for food and could be taking resources from them.
The current advice is if you do catch a pink salmon, you should humanely dispatch it and not return it to the river. Then contact the relative river authority so that they can come and collect the body and examine it. If you enjoyed this vid, please comment down below. Let me know what kind of fish myths you'd like me to cover next time, and if you can subscribe to the channel, that really helps us out. I'll see you in the next vid. Cheers.
I've just seen a fish. If only there was a reasonably priced field guide for me to identify it.
Thanks for watching, hope you enjoyed it. If you enjoyed this vid, why not check out this other video right here? If you can, please subscribe to the channel, only takes a couple of seconds and it really helps me out. I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers.